Everybody, Squirrelmob here, ready to give you again one nuts perspective. Today I want to talk about cards that I think could be unbanned. Now, this is going to include a couple fairly spicy hot takes. Maybe not the spiciest, because I am not the spiciest person out there. But these are things that I don't think necessarily should be unbanned, but that they could be unbanned. And we're going to start with the less spicy ones and progressively get a little bit spicier. So let's dive in. The first card that I think could be unbanned is Coalition Victory. Coalition Victory is an 8-mana sorcery that says you win the game if you control a land of each basic land type and a creature of each color. Now, why was it banned? One, it wins the game in an unsatisfying manner, right? Coalition Victory just kind of says, oops, I win if you've got those things met. That's not terribly exciting. I get that. And then, added to that, because you've got access to a commander in the command zone, it's pretty easy to just have that 5-color creature whenever you need it, right? So, if you can answer the creature of each color part with just one creature, then you just have to get the lands. And it turns out in EDH, land ramp is a big part of the format. So even if you're using just basic lands, you can get to a basic of each type without too much effort. And in recent years, we've had a couple cards printed that make that even easier. In Kaldheim, you have the basics that come into play or the lands that come into play tapped, the snow ones that have 2 basic land types on them. That's pretty easy to help get towards these basic land types. And then for Mycoria, you have Triomes, which have 3 land types per land. That makes it a little less hard to get to the 5 that you need. Now, here's why it should be unbanned. 1, they unbanned Worldfire. Are you kidding me? Like, there's no way that Coalition Victory is unhealthier than Worldfire is. You cannot tell me that with a straight face. The fail state for Worldfire is everyone's at 1 life and everything we did in this game no longer matters. The fail state for Coalition Victory is somebody just blew 8 mana, probably their entire turn, and the game's still going. One of those is way better than the other. The other thing is, Coalition Victory, way easier to interact with because it requires a lot of setup to get there. They have to have their creature or their creatures that have all 5 colors. They also have to have all those lands. Now, the lands are a little bit harder to blow up, but like, Beast Within is a card. If they've only got 1 card with a Plains type, you Beast Within it, and oops, there you can't win. Coalition Victory does nothing. They've got 1 creature that's 5 colors. Well, good thing I've got this Deadly Rollick in my hand. Oh look, your creature's dead, and now Coalition Victory says, cool. So, that means that there's meaningful interaction beyond just counterspells, right? Counterspells are always meaningful interaction for most spells. But Coalition Victory has a lot more that is actually meaningful because it requires so much to do. Now, can it do those things particularly quickly? Not necessarily, but it does allow for that interaction to happen. And again, I need to reiterate this. Worldfire's okay, but this isn't. Like, really? Seriously? You're going to tell me that Worldfire is okay? I don't believe you. On to the next card. Card number 4, Gifts Ungiven. Now, I started playing EDH when Gifts Ungiven was unbanned. I started playing Magic well before that, but I've been playing EDH since before Gifts Ungiven actually got banned. I've played Gifts Ungiven in decks, and it was banned for a couple pretty reasonable reasons. It gives so much value for so little cost. It's an instant, and it's blue. It's basically a double Demonic Tutor in a blue at instant speed. That's pretty darn good. It's kind of above the curve. It also has a drawback built in. The drawback is you have to find cards with 4 different names. The drawback is for 60 card formats. It's not a drawback in EDH. You get 4 different cards anyways, right? That's all you can get. I mean, I guess theoretically with like Intuition you could get 3 lands with the same name, but like, okay, cool. That's like the one corner case where that matters. It's pretty easy to assemble winning combos off of it, right? So you can go get a couple cards. Maybe if you've got, say, probably the easiest to do would be Underworld Breach and Lion's Eye Diamond and Savine's Reclamation and Brain Freeze. You get all 4 pieces of that combo, and you're able to just win from there, more or less. I guess you need potentially the mana to flashback Savine's to do it, but if you cast Gifts Ungiven on an end step, then you go to your turn and untap, you've probably got that mana. It's pretty busted. Now granted, that's going to be a combo that only gets played at some of the highest power tables, but you can do similar things at lower power tables. Now here's why it should be unbanned. This card is no longer as much above the curve as other cards, given what has been printed over the last period of time. Is it still really, really good? Yes, it is. Is it that much better than some of the other things we've seen? No, not necessarily. It does work well with some of those things, though. Like, it works pretty well with Underworld Breach. There's no denying that. But generally speaking, cards that have been printed have gotten better. And Gifts Ungiven, yeah, it's pretty cool. It does some pretty cool things, but it's not necessarily blowing anybody away. It's honestly one of the tamer things on the ban list. Another thing that really I think could help bring this back is that people don't play a ton of tutors at lower power levels. People have learned that tutoring is somewhat counterintuitive to the goal of the format, right? The goal of the format is to embrace the variance. Gifts Ungiven, being a tutor, is, I think, reasonable to assume that people who already say, well, maybe we shouldn't be playing tutors, probably aren't going to jump to it. And if a lot of people are saying, maybe we shouldn't be playing as many tutors, they may not embrace Gifts Ungiven the way that it was embraced beforehand. I think there's been a lot of education about how to approach building and playing for a wide swath of the people playing EDH, so that I would be willing to bet that the average EDH game now looks pretty close to what the RC intends it to be. There are also a lot of easy to assemble combos. Gifts Ungiven can go find them, but it turns out you can find them in other ways too that are just as easy, which kind of goes back to this idea of the delta between Gifts Ungiven and other powerful cards shrinking. Like, yeah, Gifts Ungiven still goes and finds these things, but if you want to do those things, you're already doing them anyways. Gifts Ungiven doesn't necessarily make it that much easier to do them. And also, it's turned out that most of them have been pretty self-policing as well. Is Thassa's Oracle and Demonic Consultation kind of an issue for players who are playing at high power levels? Yeah, it can be. But it's much less of an issue where it doesn't get played in lower power levels. Is it just as powerful there? Yes, absolutely. It still wins the game. But people recognize that it's not appropriate to be played there. So, when you have a card that's just going and finding easy to assemble combos, are they going to be played in places where those easy to assemble combos aren't played? Not really. So I think Gifts Ungiven would probably be fairly well self-policing, which is one of the things that keeps cards off the ban list. Card number 3 is Panoptic Mirror. Panoptic Mirror is an artifact that lets you copy spells that you exile with it, that you imprint on it. So why is it banned? Supposedly it was banned after 1v1 playtesting. This is according to a link that I'll put in the description here, that Sheldon and another player were playtesting 1v1 with, I think, 100 life per person, and decided that after a number of playtesting sessions that Panoptic Mirror should be banned. Okay. So to me that just doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because Commander is what, a 4 or 5 or 6 player game usually? Which means that there are more people who can help answer Panoptic Mirror if somebody is doing something out of hand with it. There's a lot of different types of cards, though, that you can use with Panoptic Mirror that cause some unhealthy game states. Obviously, the most common of those is turns, right? You stick a Time Warp underneath this, and you're going to take infinite turns. Not particularly a healthy play pattern. If you stick a Wrath underneath it, nobody's going to have creatures for more than their own turn going forward unless they've got some way to break parity on that. So it can lead to some pretty unhealthy play patterns in that way. Now, here's why it should be unbanned. The worst play pattern, turns, already are fairly well self-policing. Most people recognize that turns aren't appropriate at every power level. And Panoptic Mirror, I think, is more interesting at those power levels where turns aren't appropriate to be played. I think Panoptic Mirror is far less interesting at the power levels where turns are appropriate to be played. And so I think those combinations would be self-policing out of being an issue. It also takes a lot to get this going. It's a 5-mana artifact to begin with, which isn't the most expensive to do, but it's also not the cheapest. If you want to put a card under it immediately, it's going to cost more than 5. If you want to put a card under it so that you can get it to trigger at your next upkeep, you have to wait till your next turn, which means it's got big target energy. It means that if you put this down and you're not doing something with it right away, you're likely to get beat up a little bit. Or it's likely to get blown up, right? Back when it was printed, there was artifact destruction, but a lot of it wasn't really good. Nowadays, artifact destruction gets printed incidentally on all sorts of creatures and spells, that there's just a bunch of really good cards that sometimes can blow up artifacts. They get played. Cool. That means it's easier to deal with this. Awesome. Which means that maybe it can be around, be safe. Now, let's get into the real spicy stuff. Oh, yeah, that's right. Forgot about this. Panoptic Mirror also has more things that care about copying now, right? We've got the whole copy spell subset of cards in Strixhaven. Now, I don't think Panoptic Mirror, Gifts Ungiven, or Coalition Victory are particularly spicy targets for unbanning. The next one, I think a lot of people have said, this should be unbanned. So it's maybe not the spiciest, but I think part of the reason that I'm going to quote why it should be unbanned is a little spicy. That card is Recurring Nightmare. Now, do I think this will be unbanned? No. Why it's banned? Repeated use of Enter the Battlefield triggers, these 187 triggers, and dies triggers on creatures. And it's an unintuitive design to interact with, right? It's an enchantment. It plays more like a sorcery. Really, there's not a lot of ways that you can deal with it. And then the reason that it's quoted why it was banned is that games revolve around it. Basically, if you've got a good enough setup, probably you play Recurring Nightmare and you don't do anything else for the rest of the game. Here's why I think it should be unbanned. 1, there's way better graveyard hate now than in 2008. In 2008, we had, like, Tormod's Crypt. Maybe 1 or 2 other things, but, like, it was basically Tormod's Crypt. I guess there was Scrabbling Claws and, like, Furnace of something or other. Phyrexian Furnace, is that what it is? There's some bad cards. Nowadays, there's a whole lot of good graveyard hate. Bajuka Bog, that's a card people love to run. Scavenging Ooze, excellent. There's all sorts of cards that incidentally just remove things from graveyards. There's targeted graveyard hate. There's mass graveyard hate. There's Rest in Peace. That card just makes Recurring Nightmare sit there and do nothing. Like, there are a lot of good pieces that people play that hate out graveyards. A lot more now than when this was banned in 2008. It also requires a lot of setup to use inappropriately early, right? If we talk about the length of a game, powerful things, and this has been said by the RC, that powerful things are okay to happen, they just should happen later in the game. If you want to really heavily abuse Recurring Nightmare, it takes a decent amount of setup. You have to have enough mana to do it. You have to have a stocked graveyard. You have to have a creature in play to sacrifice to it. You have to have some benefit to doing that. And, like, yes, theoretically you can get there by turn 3 or turn 4. But we're really talking about turn 9, turn 10, turn 11 before you start doing that. And even when you do that, that's usually not going to take over the game. Which means, if it's not going to take over the game, it has big target energy. If you play a Recurring Nightmare and you're not able to just do something absurd off of it, you're going to become a target, which means people are going to use one of the best pieces of removal available in the game. Player removal. They're going to just attack you, and you're going to get taken out. It's a card that is a big flashing warning sign that says, I'm going to do something. But it's not a flashing warning sign that says, I'm going to do something and win out of nowhere. It's a flashing warning sign that says, I'm going to accrue a bunch of value. And you know how you can answer a bunch of value? Just beating down. Absolutely, just beating down. Now here's the spicy reason I think this should be unbanned. It's on the reserve list. If it gets unbanned, the price will probably skyrocket. Now I think a lot of people will say, well, why would you do that? Why would you monkey around with the price? Why? That's not a good reason. But here's the thing. If that gets unbanned and the price goes up, is it likely to fall into places where it wouldn't be appropriate to be used? I don't think so. I think it would basically create a price gate that would prevent people from using it in inappropriate areas. Right now, it's around 50 to 60 bucks, which is pretty expensive. That's pretty expensive for a card that doesn't really see any play anywhere. If it got unbanned in EDH, it'd easily probably be 200 bucks, if not more than that. There's a lot of people who wouldn't go out of their way to pay 200 bucks for a card like Recurring Nightmare when something like Corpse Dance exists. It does not the same thing, but not entirely dissimilar a thing. Yeah, it's a little more expensive to do it, but it's a reasonable replacement. It's already legal, and it's, 20 bucks? Now, the last card on this list is also a reserve list card, and it's Yawgmoth's Bargain. I told you I was going to have a spicy one for you. Yawgmoth's Bargain absolutely is absurd. Here's why it's banned. You pay 1 life, you draw a card. That's nuts, right? In a format with 40 starting life, that's really, really, really powerful. Here's why it should be unbanned. I know you're thinking, wait, why would you unban this, right? First, there are already so many similar effects that I think that Yawgmoth's Bargain actually just diversifies how they're used. So right now you have Ad Nauseam, you have Peer into the Abyss, you have Necropotence, and you have Bolus's Citadel, right? Ad Nauseam requires you to kind of build around it in a deck, but it can actually potentially draw you more cards than Yawgmoth's Bargain could. Peer into the Abyss is going to draw you more cards per life than any of the others, but it's 7 mana, so it's the most expensive, and it's a sorcery, which means it's kind of the easiest to deal with. Well, not necessarily the easiest to deal with, but it's a sorcery that targets, which means it can get deflecting swatted, it can get counterspelled, but honestly, it's going to draw you more cards than Bargain will. Bolus's Citadel takes more life to do things with it, but it's also actually casting spells, which can be good or bad, depending on, if you hit, say, a land, it's not so good. But if you hit some other spell off of it, like a Peer into the Abyss or something, that's pretty solid. Necropotence, obviously, does the same thing as Bargain, except that you don't get the cards till the end of your turn, which obviously is worse, right? Getting the cards now, getting the cards at the end of your turn, huge difference, right? But if you want to abuse Necropotence, you can. People do that. And yet people do that in parts of the format where it's appropriate to do so, right? Necropotence doesn't get a lot of play in parts of the format where Necropotence shouldn't get play. Same with Ad Naus. Same with Peer into the Abyss. Actually, probably Peer into the Abyss sees more play than any of the others, I would guess, because it's honestly a splashier card, and it doesn't require as much work as any of the others. And I think it's not better than Yawgmoth's Bargain. That would be absurd. But I think it's an interesting counterpoint to Yawgmoth's Bargain. I think Bargain would diversify how people approach these types of effects. Also, I think it gets to the idea of what the ban list is communicating. Yawgmoth's Bargain being banned while all those other cards are unbanned doesn't make a ton of sense. And having both Yawgmoth's Bargain and Gristlebrand banned doesn't make a ton of sense either. Gristlebrand does a better job of showing off, hey, we don't want you to use this type of thing, than Yawgmoth's Bargain does. Because most people who are playing Commander nowadays, who have started playing in the last 5 years, they've probably never even seen a Yawgmoth's Bargain. Because it's banned in the format they play. It's banned in EDH. Which leads to a weird case where Gristlebrand, which is in, one of these secret layers that just got announced, like, that's a card that people are aware of. Yawgmoth's Bargain? Not so much. Gristlebrand is also much more powerful. It's easier to cheat in a play. It draws you more cards. It also says you don't have to skip your draw step. Like, Gristlebrand is pretty strong. And, much like a couple other cards I've mentioned, Yawgmoth's Bargain has big target energy. If you play Yawgmoth's Bargain and you can't just win off of playing it, you're probably going to get beat down before you can do much else. Like, you get to draw a bunch of cards, cool, people are going to attack you now. You are the target. If you are playing Yawgmoth's Bargain and then able to just win off of it, you probably could be playing Ad Nauseam or Peer into the Abyss or Bolas's Citadel and just winning off of them, right? So there's not a lot of a change there, except the Yawgmoth's Bargain is a little bit harder to cast than a couple of those. And much like with Recurring Nightmare, Yawgmoth's Bargain right now is $25, which isn't terribly expensive. If it was unbanned, again, the price would shoot up. And it would probably gate itself out of play groups where it would be inappropriate to be playing at that power level. It would probably be mainly maintained at higher power play groups that where it would be appropriate and where it would be balanced with what was happening. Now, do I think it's likely to happen? No. But I think it'd be boldly interesting to see what happened, or see what would happen with this card legal. Now, all of these cards are very likely to stay on the ban list. It's very likely for them to not ever see the light of day again. But maybe one day one of them will. I'm curious to hear, what cards do you think should be unbanned? What cards on the ban list do you think have the most potential to be reasonable if they saw the light of day? What do you think the RC should consider looking at? Does anything need to be unbanned? Is the ban list good as it is? Leave me a comment in the comments. Hit that subscribe button. Ring that bell. Make sure that you are here for whatever else we roll out with these crazy takes. See you all later. Thanks for stopping by.